Senator, point of order.
Point of order. Pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, which Mr. Kennedy is violative of, I move that we move into executive session because Mr. Kennedy has repeatedly made despicable anti-Semitic and anti-Asian comments as recently as last week. Rule 11, Clause 2 says, whenever it is asserted by a member of the committee that the evidence or testimony at a hearing may tend to defame, degrade, or incriminate any person, or it is asserted by a witness that the evidence or testimony that the witness would give at a hearing may tend to defame, degrade, or incriminate the witness, and it goes on. Mr. Kennedy, among many other things, has said, I know a lot now about bioweapons. We put out hundreds of millions of dollars into ethnically targeted microbes. The Chinese have done the same thing. In fact, COVID-19, there is an argument that it is ethnically targeted. COVID-19 attacks certain races disproportionately. The races that are most immune to COVID-19 are...
Is the lady making a motion or a speech?
I've made a motion to move into executive session because Mr. Kennedy's testimony...
Mr. Chairman, I
and
move
his
to table the
previous
motion.
statements...
The gentleman from Kentucky has moved to table.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a roll call vote on the motion to table.
Well, let me ask the question. The question is on the motion to table. The gentlelady has asked for a roll call vote. The clerk will have to step back for a second. The clerk will have to come in. We'll call the roll on the motion to table, and then we can get back to testimony.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Gentleman from Louisiana.
Is it the custom of this committee to censor viewpoints that we disagree with from witnesses?
Mr. Chairman, I have a motion on the table.
There's a motion and the vote's been
Move
called.
into executive session.
We're waiting for the clerks.
Is violative of Rule 11, Clause 2.
Waiting for the clerks. Clerk will call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we respectfully requested that you rescind Mr. Kennedy's invitation to appear here due to his repeated and very recent statements that spread dangerous anti-Semitic and anti-Asian conspiracy theories and attempted to move into executive session because House rules prohibit public testimony that degrades or defames people. His reckless rhetoric helped fuel anti-Semitic incidents, which for the record are at the highest level in the United States since 1970. They have nearly tripled in the last 6 years. Since you gave Mr. Kennedy a megaphone today, I want to give him a chance to correct his statements and prepare some of the harm that he's helped cause. Mr. Kennedy, you're well educated. So yes or no, please, are you aware that for centuries Jews have been scapegoated and blamed for causing illnesses like Black Plague and more recently COVID?
I am. Those are known as blood libel, and they are one of the worst and most disturbing parts of human history.
Good. I'm glad to know that, of course, that you acknowledge that. Of course, it's true and well documented that this pernicious form of anti-Semitism led to centuries of discrimination, even horrific pogroms and massacres, and it still fuels deadly violence today. Yet last week, you floated a baseless conspiracy theory that the coronavirus was bioengineered to target Caucasians and Black people, but to spare Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese people. Mr. Kennedy, your bizarre, unproven claim echoes that same historic slander of labeling Jews and Chinese people as a race, and that Jews, and in this case Chinese people, somehow managed to avoid a deadly illness that targets other groups for death. You do see that, yes or no?
You're misstating.
No. I quoted what you said earlier, and it is directly what you said. So just ask me yes or no.
I was describing an NIH-funded study.
No, you didn't cite any.
I was describing an NIH-funded study by Cleveland Clinic scientists.
Reclaiming my time. You did not reference. Reclaiming my time.
Published in USC Medical, which is one of...
The time is mine. I'm reclaiming it. Please ask the witness to stop talking.
You asked me a question.
Reclaiming.
Allow me to answer my question.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like about 10 seconds back.
You are slandering me incorrectly. You're saying it's dishonest.
Time belongs to the gentlelady from Florida.
I defend myself.
Mr. Chairman,
time belongs to the gentlelady from Florida.
I'd like 15 seconds back.
We will be happy to give you that.
Thank you so much. You did not cite any study like you are citing here now during that conversation. You referenced no study at all. You simply labeled Jews and Chinese people as a race, and you also said that somehow they managed to avoid a deadly illness that targets other groups for death. You don't see that? You're trying to rewrite history here. A few months ago, Mr. Kennedy, you compared COVID public health policies to barbaric, murderous tactics of Nazi Germany, saying that Jewish people in Nazi Germany had more freedom than Americans facing COVID health restrictions. In hindsight, Mr. Kennedy, do you reject this absurd and deeply hurtful and harmful comparison, or do you still stand by it?
Congressman, what you are saying is a lie.
That you said it.
No, I did not. I never contained.
Okay.
I never, ever
Mr. Chairman, I'm
compared
happy to answer
COVID
into the record when Mr.
countermeasures.
Kennedy said that. I reclaim my time. In discussing COVID public health measures, you made light of the genocide against Jewish people by saying, and I quote, even Hitler's Germany, you could cross the Alps to Switzerland, you could hide in an attic like Anne Frank did. Mr. Kennedy, do you think it was easy for Jewish people to escape systematic slaughter of Nazis, yes or no?
Absolutely not.
Okay, good. Mr. Kennedy, do you think it was just as hard to wear a mask during COVID as it was to hide under floorboards or false walls so you weren't murdered or dragged to a concentration camp? Yes or no?
Excuse me?
That's a question, yes or no?
I didn't hear your question.
Okay. I said, do you think it was just as hard to wear a mask during COVID as it was to hide under floorboards or false walls so you weren't murdered or dragged to a concentration camp?
Of course not. That's
Okay.
ridiculous.
But that's a comparison that you made.
I did
Mr.
not
Kennedy,
make that comparison.
Were the measures taken to contain the spread and fatalities related to COVID in any way at all comparable to the murder of 6 million Jews, yes or no?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Let's be very clear here. There's no legitimate comparison to the Holocaust. It doesn't matter if you're talking about AI, vaccine mandates, or anything else. There is no comparison. And if this were a slip of the tongue, Mr. Kennedy, or a one-off comment, we would all move on. But there's a deeply disturbing pattern. In 2015, you apologized to all those, quote, whom I offended by my use of the word Holocaust to describe the autism epidemic. When discussing efforts to encourage others to get vaccinated for COVID-19, you said Nazis did that in the camps in World War II. They tested vaccines on gypsies and Jews. That was a quote. Like before, you apologized for invoking the Holocaust, saying, quote, to the extent my remarks caused hurt, I am truly and deeply sorry. These are not real statements of contrition or remorse. They are passive-aggressive non-apologies that blame the listener for reacting to the lie you just spread. I'm deeply saddened that this is a conversation we're having today. I have deep respect for what Mr. Kennedy's family did and still does to make life better for all Americans. But what you are doing now, Mr. Kennedy, and the forces you aligned yourself are reckless, dangerous, and disturbing by echoing dangerous claims such as, quote, Jews don't really suffer as much as we do, which you said. Your rhetoric creates a climate of mistrust, antagonism, and even hatred or violence against Jewish people. My own children have been the targets of brutal anti-Semitism on social media. You fan those flames and jeopardize their safety. You've marginalized other groups too, like Asian Americans and the LGBTQ+ community. And worse, you don't seem to care or brush it all off to misquotes and misunderstanding. Frankly, it's disgusting. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my
Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous consent request.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for UC.
I ask unanimous consent to introduce into the record a study that Mr. Kennedy just referenced, new insights into genetic susceptibility of COVID-19. The main body said that they investigated genetic susceptibility to COVID-19 by examining DNA polymorphism in ACE2 and TMPRSS2. Those are receptors for COVID in 81,000 human genomes, and they found unique genetic susceptibility across different populations. I have another document that I would like to ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
To submit, and this is from the FDA review of efficacy and safety of Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. This is dated December 10th, 2020, and it shows that the Pfizer trial and the USDA broke down the effectiveness of the vaccine into 7 different racial categories because this was also a concern of theirs, and it would frankly be delinquent not to study the effects across the different
But Mr.
races.
Kennedy said it was bioengineered.
The founders of and the framers of our Constitution knew that democracy was a very inefficient system, and it had all of these built-in inefficiencies and difficulties. They said that they felt that it would give us the one thing that would give us an advantage over totalitarian systems was this capacity for the free flow of information and a complete lack of control of debate, so that ideas that would eventually mature into policies would be annealed in a furnace of debate and then rise through the marketplace of ideas rather than being dictated from above. And that's what would give the energy, the vibrancy, the vigor to democracy. When they invented this democracy, we were the first one in the modern era in 1780. 1865, 5 other nations had imitated us. Today, it's 190 nations based upon our system. We are supposed to be the exemplary democracy, and the corner foundation stone of our system is freedom of speech. All of the other freedoms depend on it. If we lose that, not only do we lose our democracy in this country, but the entire world
Exactly.
us as an example.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better. Now I recognize the gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman, state a request.
Ask for unanimous consent to enter the record an article by the New York Times on July the 20th, 2023. New York Post published Hunter Biden report amid newsroom doubts. Ask for unanimous consent.
You can, without objection.
Thank you.
Some things amaze me. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized, and this will be our last line of questioning.
One of the immutable and undeniable tenets of immunology is natural immunity. But for 2 years, it was denied. It wasn't even just denied, it was censored. Mr. Sauer, I noticed in the court ruling, in the case that you worked on, that they said that, the court said that Facebook reported to the White House that it labeled and demoted posts suggesting natural immunity to a COVID-19 infection is superior to vaccine immunity. Is that true? Was that kind of censorship going on?
Yes, that kind of censorship was going on, and there were direct communications between the platforms and federal officials about natural immunity specifically that I think you've correctly quoted.
And thanks to the Twitter files, we found out that the former FDA director who was on the board of Pfizer, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, wrote on August 27th, 2021 to Twitter executive Todd O'Boyle, who, by the way, was kind of one of the go-to people for the White House also to coordinate with when they wanted something suppressed, requested Twitter take action against a post about natural immunity. You know what's amazing to me is Scott Gottlieb, who works for Pfizer, who's a former FDA director, went to Twitter the day I got censored on natural immunity, my post, a congressional post. Now, the other side said, well, your tweet's still up, your post is still up. What do you mean you're getting censored? What they did is they labeled it and they denied anybody's ability to actually comment on it, and they deboosted it. So I simply said natural immunity is better than vaccine immunity. We had studies showing that. They took it, they censored it. So the next day I tried it again with a reference to Bloomberg, hardly a right-wing outlet or conspiracy generator, and they censored that one as well. This is astounding to me. Mr. Kennedy, can you talk about the censorship, the effort of the White House and pharma to suppress the acknowledgement of natural immunity and why they might have been doing that?
Well, again, there was an effort to suppress information, not, in fact, if you read the Twitter files and the email correspondence between Facebook and the White House, there was an acknowledgement that they were being asked and they were complying with censoring information that everybody knew to be true or highly likely to be true. The purpose, and in fact, the term misinformation did not denote falsehood or veracity. Rather, it was a euphemism for any information that departed from government orthodoxies. And it is very dangerous. And you know, the congressman a minute ago said 1 million people have died because of misinformation about vaccines in this country. But in fact, our country had had one of the highest vaccination rates in the world and the worst health outcomes. We have 4.2% of the global population. We had 16% of the COVID deaths. Blacks in Haiti with a 1% vaccination rate were dying at a rate of 15 per million population. And same in Nigeria, had a 1.3 vaccination rate. They were dying at 1 in 14 per million population. 14 per million population. In our country, blacks were dying at 3,000 per million population, 200 times the death rates in other countries. And this holds throughout the world. We needed information. We should have all been sharing information openly and talking to the 15 million doctors through the internet who were treating patients on the front line all over the world and channeling the best therapies, the most successful treatments, so that we can all figure it out. This is not a time in a pandemic to I'll just say this one thing. Trusting the experts is not a function of science. It's not a function of democracy. It's a function of religion and totalitarianism, and it does not make for a healthier population.
Let me ask you this. You referenced your father and your uncle and the party that they were in. What has happened to your party with respect to the First Amendment? Would they recognize the position now?
I think, listen, I'm a Democrat, and I believe in all if you went through a checklist of all of the things that my father believed in, that he fought for, that my uncle believed in and fought for, I would check every box. I feel my party has departed from some of those core values, and one of the reasons that I want to run for president is to reclaim my party for those. But it's got to, listen, this is not a partisan issue. The First Amendment, it just seems crazy to me that anybody thinks that it's okay to censor, and there's a lot of information that I don't like. There's hateful information, but as the chairman was saying, in 1977, the ACLU went out and supported Nazis who were walking through a Jewish neighborhood in Skokie, Illinois. And they said, that's important. We hate what they're saying. We're repulsed by it. But we cannot survive as a democracy if we are not ready to die for the right for even people who are appalling to speak. The democracy won't work. Unfortunately, there's no other way to control it but through the First Amendment and free speech.
Amen, and thank you for those